Good afternoon to one and all. Respected keynote speaker of the today's webinar, Dr. Ratna Bharamgoudar, Professor of Law, Karnataka State Law University, Dharwad, and distinguished delegates. All these days during COVID-19 pandemic, we have been organizing series of webinars on various relevant topics. Today, we have come with a novel theme, that is gender sensitization and equality. Gender sensitizing is about creating awareness on changing behavior and instilling empathy into the views that we hold about our own and weaker genders. It helps people in examining their personal attitudes, beliefs, and questioning the realities they thought they know. On behalf of KLE Society's JG College of Commerce, Hubballi, and delegates, I wholeheartedly welcome Dr. Ratna Bharamgoudar. I also extend warm welcome to all the delegates to the webinar. Hope that you will take the optimal advantage of this program. I conclude by wishing the program grand success. Thank you.
Good afternoon to the dignitaries and all the delegates. It's my immense pleasure to introduce our today's keynote speaker, Dr. Ratna R. Bharamgoudar, graduated from Karnataka University, Dharwad, obtaining Bachelor of Arts degree in 1991. Further, Madam has completed her LLB degree at KOD in 1994 and LLM degree from PG Department of Studies in Law at KOD in 1996, specializing in mercantile law. Madam completed her PhD in law on the topic A Critical Study on Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence in India in the year 2006 at KOD. Madam joined University College of Law in February 1999 as Assistant Professor of Law, and presently Madam is working as a Professor of Law at Karnataka State Law University. Madam is discharging additional responsibilities as a Director, College Development Council, and as a University Nodal Officer for All India Survey for Higher Education. Madam has also held various posts at KOD such as Register in Charge and In Charge Finance Officer and so on. Madam was selected as a member of a Rotary International Group Study Exchange Program of a Rotary Foundation to visit Brazil from Rotary District 3170 in 1998. She has undertaken UGC research project on a protection of women from sexual harassment at workplace, a study in Hubli, Dharwad. Her service and contribution to the Law Society is commendable and impossible to express in such a short time. So we are very glad to have a great personality for today's program. I, Parvati Katti, Chairman, V Council, KLE Society's Jagadguru Gangadhara College of Commerce. I would like to welcome you, ma'am, for the program. Thank you.
Very good evening to everyone. I'm extremely happy and I'm honored to be part of national level webinar which is organized by JG College of Commerce. First and foremost, I thank the organizers for the invitation extended to me. The topic for today's webinar is gender sensitization and equality. Under this heading, I would be addressing the issue which is very relevant and pertinent in the current scenario of COVID-19 pandemic and series of lockdowns imposed by the governments, not only in India but all over the world. The topic for today's discussion is gender equality and women's rights in view of ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. I would be presenting for about 30 minutes. I have divided my presentation into 4 parts. Firstly, I will be addressing gender equality as a human right and need for gender equality. Secondly, I will be discussing COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on women. That is, how this pandemic situation has amplified gender inequalities. And thirdly, I will be focusing on what is the way forward, that is the need for gender sensitive response during pandemic and also post pandemic. And lastly, the conclusion. Gender equality concerns each and every member of the society and forms the very basis of a just society. In the recent years, there is a growing recognition of women's rights as human rights and also women's rights as an integral and indivisible part of universal human rights. Justice, liberty, equality and dignity that are mentioned in our Constitution are the steps to the attainment of gender equality. The claim for gender equality, which is for women's status, is also for achieving human worth and to restore universal justice. However, the ground reality is that equality for women is more in the books than in the society. Women continue to be an unequal partners, and unfortunately, this holds good even today as we stand at the threshold of the 21st century. A study or a survey will bring out the hard reality that the status of women, their opportunity for employment, their literacy are a negation of the constitutional promise of equality, which is her basic human right. Clearly and apparently, the fate of women in this age of space exploration and cyber revolution is no better than it was in medieval societies, as media reports of the increase in violence and crime against women are an indication to this fact. The women's liberation and progress certainly does not mean hatred for men. Nevertheless, in an era of emancipation, the struggle for equality continues. With a rise in awareness and emphasis upon the gender equality and women's rights, there is an increasing effort to guard against the violation of these fundamental rights and a strong resentment towards violence against women. I would like to emphasize here, if women are neglected, humanity is deprived of half of its energy and creativity. Now further, taking up for discussion, COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on women. Since the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus outbreak a global public health emergency, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all the countries and has cost innumerable lives. The pandemic has also focused on the lack of preparedness on part of the governments and crisis management agencies in effectively managing the threat of virus. Now, beyond the cost to human lives, which is reflected in chilling daily statistics and the economic fallout, the costs to marginalized and vulnerable groups continue to add up behind the scenes. The limited progress in gender equality and women's rights that have happened over the decades are in danger of being undone due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In a recent message to world leaders, United Nations Secretary General urged governments to put women and girls at the center of their efforts to recover from COVID-19, and that should start with women as leaders with equal representation and decision-making power. While it will take some time to study and document the scope and gendered nature of this new disease, the early trends indicate that it is already deepening the pre-existing inequalities which are amplifying the pandemic's impact on the overall security of women and girls. Understanding how the pandemic has directly and indirectly increased gender inequalities is very crucial in responding to the current COVID-19 pandemic. The following are the areas where women and girls are particularly at risk and in need of strong protection in the current crisis situation. Now, firstly, women comprise of approximately 70% of the global healthcare workforce. These healthcare professionals are under immense pressure to contain the pandemic at greater risk to their own lives. Every country where the pandemic is wreaking havoc has reported a shocking number of deaths of doctors and nurses as they perform their duties, often even without adequate protective gear or even without enough time to allow necessary rest and care for themselves. Now, this being so, female healthcare workers globally find distress further compounded as they are also necessary caregivers at home for their family members and also taking on household work. Now, secondly, now experience shows that domestic, sexual and gender-based violence increases during crisis and disasters. It happened during 2014 Ebola and 2015 Zika epidemics and is also happening now. Now, under conditions of quarantine or stay-at-home orders, women and children who live with violent and controlling men are exposed to considerably greater danger. Lockdown and stay-at-home orders, now they are exposing women to higher incidence of domestic violence. The sharp rise in cases of domestic violence globally has put women and girls at the receiving end of physical and emotional abuse with an inadequate network of support. Now, due to factors like unemployment, job insecurity, and the mental stress of being locked in for an indefinite period of time is resulting in increased alcohol or drug consumption and further, the frustrated or unemployed or struggling to access tobacco or alcohol, several men are unloading their anger through physical or verbal or sexual assault on women. Now, this violence is affecting millions of women of all classes and all over the world. In the past few months, several countries have recorded an unprecedented increase in calls from women seeking help from the abusive partners. Now, thirdly, according to a research that has been conducted on virus's impact in slum communities in Mumbai, which is India's financial capital and now the biggest COVID-19 hotspot. Now, the research reveals that in a way this lockdown has worsened the marginalization of women, especially for poor women. Even in normal times, women face extra burden when infrastructure is inadequate. According to this study, which focused on access to water, about 4.5 million people in Mumbai, they lack access to household water connection, forcing them to line up at community water taps. Now, under India's strict COVID-19 lockdown, household water needs have swelled up, owing to family members being at home and the emphasis on frequent hand washing. The result, women are spending more time lining up for water, and as women step out in the early hours to fetch water, they often face sexual and verbal harassment. Now, fourthly, COVID-19 is shifting other household dynamics also. Domestic responsibilities that women do, like cooking and cleaning, have increased manifold during this pandemic. Even worse, because women in Indian families, they tend to eat last and the least, and research has shown that financial strain and food shortages affect women's nutrition. Now, the same pattern is visible across all the developing countries of the world. Now, fifthly, to make matters worse, the lockdown has cut off most formal and informal support systems for women. In developing countries, low-income families, they often share one smartphone, mostly owned by the male member. Women's lack of digital access is making them more vulnerable to misinformation. And not only that, unequal access to technology will lead to other consequences for women, especially in education and employment. As many of the world's children are switching over to online learning, girls in countries like India and other developing countries may lose out, given that they are less likely than boys to have access to the internet. Sixthly, the pandemic has already derailed careers and has dried up opportunities, and it will make it harder for women to rejoin the workforce after the pandemic subsides. Women face unequal work opportunities the world over and are at an disadvantage when taking sabbaticals for childbirth or childcare. A slowing economy and male-dominated workforce will present additional obstacles for women. Seventhly, the effect of pandemic on rural and urban poor women is pathetic beyond imagination. Having faced the immediate burden of lockdown with little savings and absolutely no institutional support, the plight of migrant women, daily wage women workers, as well as women serving in sectors like retail and hospitality is pitiable. The post-COVID job market will further deepen workplace inequalities and will confine women to the traditional homemaker's role. Now further, unpredictable weather events have already resulted in extreme damage to the crops, with the potential impact of COVID-19 bringing further uncertainty to the agricultural sector, and also male migrant workers returning to villages have handed a raw deal to rural Indian women. This disastrous impact on women has implications that can easily reverse the progress made in empowerment of women, whether it is maybe business, maybe food security, or maternal health, or infant mortality. Eighthly, as India eases its lockdown with requirements that businesses operate with fewer employees, and as women are generally confined to menial tasks within production processes, it will be their jobs that will first have to go. And with partial lockdowns involving reduced public transit, women might find their access to work curtailed, given their dependence on public transport, that is, their reliance on buses and trains for commuting to workplace. India, which is already struggling with declining female labor force participation, if women's employment continues to drop post-COVID, this will only magnify the damage to their position in families and society, as employment is one of the strongest reasons for women's empowerment. In India, the labor force participation of women has been trending downwards for the past 10 years. While there are several reasons for the decrease in the formal sector, a crisis like COVID-19 is sure to carry serious implications. The unemployment tracker managed by the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy has indicated that India has already seen a 20% decline in vacancies. In such a situation, women are at a higher risk of losing their jobs and facing issues re-entering the labor force. Now further, taking up for discussion, in this situation, what is the way forward? Now that is focusing on gender sensitive responses during pandemic, like fighting the pandemic. Dealing with gender-based violence is a multi-layered and a complex task, one that requires an approach in terms of allocating resources and information in order to better enable and protect women. Understanding these issues on a macroscopic level, but approaching it in a case-by-case method, can empower affected women by enacting schemes and policies for them. In India, the National Commission for Women received over 123 complaints of domestic violence and more than some 370 calls within 3 weeks of lockdown. To accommodate the spike in these cases, the National Commission for Women has launched a dedicated hotline for women experiencing violence at home during this period. Now this is a very positive development, but this must be backed up by a network of resources and support. Now assistance rendered under such programs must be deemed an essential service even under lockdowns, and if required, courts should expedite the issuance of protection orders against abusers. Dedicated free helplines that are available 24/7, easily accessible counseling, free legal aid, and more shelter homes for women are necessary, and all this requires adequate funding from the government. To quote a recent judgment of Delhi High Court, which has provided a roadmap in such situations, now this court has ordered for publicizing helplines for women, relaxing lockdown rules for women if they want to leave home and seek support, and also the most important requirement of sensitizing the police. In the wake of COVID pandemic situation, new forms of administrative support and legal safeguards are essential in protecting women's rights and interests, and to secure the entry of millions of women into the workforce, and also to recognize the enduring value of their contribution. In order to achieve this, governments and private organizations must consciously design gender responsive employment policies to bring more women into the formal economy. The provision of economic packages and relief funds can greatly ease the burden on low-income households in order to protect women's livelihoods and to prepare them for post-COVID economy. Now further, promoting the involvement of women in decision making at home, at workplace, and in top level leadership can instill more inclusivity in responses and global health policy. Government should also allocate resources for skills training for women and also for sustainable development at the grassroots level for women. Women's employment must become a priority in recovery efforts, and initiatives to enhance digital access should be scaled up and targeted specifically for the low-income group women. Direct employment programs to provide necessary supplies should be expanded. Now here I can quote one of the best example, that is the government in the state of Andhra Pradesh is employing thousands of women to stitch masks. And not only in India, but in every part of the world, the social and economic crisis of COVID-19 must be understood through the lens of gender. The policy response must be structured around rebuilding economies and societies in a way that empower women to lead safe, productive and fulfilling lives. Now to take up conclusion. Now I would say that this year, that is 2020, marks the 25th anniversary of the United Nations 4th World Conference on Women, since the international community adopted Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in the year 1995. Now it is the need for all the governments to recommit to the principle that women have the same right to participate in decision making as men do, and that women's perspectives must be accounted for. To that end, policymakers at all levels need to listen to and engage with women's rights organizations when formulating responses to this crisis. The guiding question should always be, are women and men affected differently by this issue? If so, then how we can achieve better outcomes? Today, all countries are facing the same crisis, and none will prevail over COVID-19 by acting alone. Given that we share the same future, all of us must work to ensure that it is built on solidarity and partnership. And because of this, the United Nations and the governments must show leadership. We all know that gender equal societies are more prosperous and sustainable than those with inequalities. The world's decision makers should make gender equality a top priority, as the pandemic crisis highlights the need for such an action. With this, I conclude, and once again, I thank the organizers for an opportunity given to me to share my thoughts. Thank you.